Okay. Ready to get going.
Yeah, we meet again.
We meet again. Okay, so today we're going through the book called Effortless by Greg McKeown. And I guess this is podcast episode number 2. The Mindful Reading Podcast is what we've changed the name to. So each week or each month we'll have a new name. But yeah, so reading through Effortless, I think it was a nice book to read through, so we'll discuss it a bit now.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to start with the book summary.
No, go with the book summary, and then I'll latch on to
Mine
what
is
you
a
said.
semi-formal book summary, so we'll see how it goes. Okay, so Effortless, as it says on the cover, is about making it easier to do what matters most. Put differently, making it easier to do the essential things and the hard to do things pointless. You want to make the essential things easy, the hard to do things pointless. And then the book looks at various situations where people take different paths, so difficult paths, and various situations where people take an effortless path. And so in some sense, the book's claim is that often we equate success with working hard and working endless hours, but it doesn't have to be that way. And as the title of the introductory chapter says, not everything has to be so hard. Because, we tend to make things crazy hard. In other words, often there's an effortless way. So that effortless term is obviously going to come up a lot because hence the title. So carrying on, whether that's solving a challenging problem or generating wealth or dealing with the difficulties of being a human being, again, not everything has to be so hard. So the book is split into 3 main parts: the effortless state, effortless action, and effortless results. And the effortless state is how we can make it easier to focus. And then it goes on, or sort of to summarize that, how can we get to that effortless state? So we should think along the lines of what some people call the flow state, and then where we don't feel continuously that we're fighting this uphill battle, but rather we feel that we're in a flow state. He has a sort of little sentence there that says where we feel rested, at peace, and focused. So that's kind of that effortless state. Then going on to the second one, effortless action, that's how can we make essential work easier to do? So how can we make the work we do, the actions, effortless, where it's easy to do what matters? And so that's about simplifying the process to make the work itself easier to do. So looking at the process that we take along the way. And then effortless results, it's what it sounds like. But that's about how can we get the highest return from the least investment. So how can we get those effortless results? That is getting results without continued effort. So those results are what Greg, the author, calls residual results. Think along the lines of automation and especially compound interest. So that's one of those ones that I often think back to. It's not just about compound interest, but the idea of compound interest is very much sort of the general idea of those effortless results. So not having to continually put in that effort. So we should use what he calls levers that give us leverage to get residual results. And he mentions 5 of these levers. So learning, teaching, which is an interesting one. And then automating, trusting is another interesting one. And then preventing. So that's preventative rather than reactive, I guess. And then the effortless results section looks at those levers. And then lastly, so those are the 3 parts of the book, and I'm going to end with a sentence and a summary to sum up the book. So the sentence goes, of course, you can't make everything in your life effortless, but you can make more of the right things less impossible, then easier, and then ultimately effortless. So just getting at that idea of like, how do we, because we think, it's supposed to just be effortless from the start, but no.
Yeah.
And then the story goes like this. And I really like this story. It's just a great story.
Go
I
for it.
basically just keep on going with stories.
Go for it. Go for it.
Okay, so this is towards the beginning of the book. I think it's in the introductory chapter as well. So the story goes, discovering the effortless way of living is like using special polarized glasses while fly fishing. Without them, the glare on the water makes it difficult to see anything swimming below the surface. But then, as soon as you put them on, their angled surface filters filter out the horizontal light waves coming off the water, blocking that glare. Then, suddenly, you can see all the fish, all the fish underneath. When we're accustomed to doing things the hard way, it's like being blinded by the glare coming off the water. But once you start putting these ideas into practice, you'll start to see that there was an easier way all along, just hidden below your view. So I think that's a great summary of the book, that especially that story, because it's just that idea of we think things are just incredibly difficult, but we just haven't found that way of approaching it, that different angle. So yeah, I don't know if you have additional things that you want to add and discuss.
So, I mean, your summary was very comprehensive. There's just a few things I want to add, especially from the first chapter. What really sold me on the book when I started reading it was the whole concept of him saying that things don't have to be hard for you to succeed. So, that's a very interesting train of thought because, growing up, I think, I don't know if you can relate, but we are accustomed to people telling us you need to work hard if you want to succeed in life. They equate hard work to success, but in essence, it's about doing something with the least effort to achieve the same results, and that's where Effortless comes in, being able to do those tasks that are deemed hard in the most efficient and, less time consuming or less strenuous ways. I think that's really something that most people should live by. I think we so focused on the whole work hard, then you'll be successful part. Instead of, what really needs to happen for me to achieve this so-called success. But just going back to the summary, as you've said, looking at the different parts of the book, I'll have my somewhat summary, which you've mostly laid out, for the effortless state, it's about being in that state where you don't have to work hard, but you focus on really what matters for you to get the job done. That's how I kind of, pictured what that is. And I mean, the concept used there, like invert, I think that's also very important when it comes back to, working hard versus, doing the thing the best way you can, because it teaches you about asking the question regarding a problem differently. So I felt that was really important, instead of you asking the normal question, well, what needs to be done? It's like, how easily can I get this job done? It takes about just rewording whatever question you have regarding something to make it feel differently. And I mean, with that reminded me about, I think it's in Atomic Habits where they talk about a smoker or how you identify. And if someone used to smoke or are trying to quit smoking, instead of saying I'm a smoker that's trying to stop, it's like
invert.
I used to smoke, like it's as simple as those tweaks, that makes a really big difference.
Yeah, that's like that identity thing. Like instead of being I am a smoker, you're like, no, I don't smoke.
I
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
smoke, you
yeah,
know, and I mean that identity is the same
yeah.
with whatever we do, you know. If you identify something, I know we use it. If you identify something as hard and requires hard work, and you tell yourself it's hard work, then it will be hard. But if you turn that around to be like, this needs to be done, I will enjoy doing it, and it no longer seems as hard work, and that goes with in the effortless state. You need to enjoy what you do. That's just picking a few. And then with effortless action, it's literally getting things done with the minimum path of resistance, essentially. You know, I think I remember my previous job that was always a point of contention, because people hated you taking the path of least resistance. But I mean, reading this book, you're encouraged to do to take the path of least resistance. But I think maybe the caveat where people miss or don't really say out loud is that if you pick that path of least resistance, you need to at least put in some prep time so that you have that path of least resistance. Because if you don't do that, then you might take that path without really understanding what you need to do. And as that chapter starts off, it talks about defining what it is you're doing. And I mean, only if you understand what the end goal is, you know, can you take that path of least resistance, because then you do all you need to do to get to that end goal. Because if you don't define it, you'll be like, I'm taking the path of least resistance, but where are you going with that path? You know, only if you understand that end goal, then, you know, do you understand what the best path of least resistance is. So that's just to touch on effortless action. And as for the last point, which is effortless results, and you said the teaching part was interesting.
Very nice.
But to me, I think I can also relate. You know, with before you teach, you have to prepare. You know, and through that allows you to go over the material, whatever it is you're about to teach, over and over again. And by the time you deliver, not only are you delivering to an audience, you're pretty much telling it back to yourself, meaning that you've gone through multiple instances where you've gone through or covered that material, meaning that it then sticks in your head. And as a result, it becomes effortless to not only teach that, or do what it is that you're teaching. So, yeah, that's pretty much some of the things that I added to my summary of the book, you know, based on the 3 parts it's broken into.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree. And I think that idea of teaching is just, even just the idea of stories in general, which is why I like the lot of the stories in this book. I think when you were talking about the invert part, I think there's a story at the beginning of the book where I'll paraphrase the story. So, lots of grains of salt, yeah. But so where there's the lecturer who, I think it's a lecturer who asks someone to do a recording of the lecture, something along those lines, and you can go along the line of all of this, setting up a massive production and making sure that they have like serious audio stuff and the lighting is good and all these kinds of things, and making sure you have the right, streaming platforms.
Yeah. No, I think in this case, it was someone that was, I think, in like the film or media department, so they wanted them to set up a whole rig and spend time in recording this lecture. But yeah, go on.
Yeah, so they like, you have this option of doing this incredibly fancy thing, which possibly is the right way to go if the audience is millions of people. But what they needed to do is they needed to say, okay, well, wait, who is this for? And when they asked that question, because they didn't just make the assumption like, oh, okay, of course I need to do all this fancy stuff. they said, okay, well, let me change this around and just first get who this is for, and then I'll look at it. And it turns out that it was actually just for one student who couldn't attend the class or something along those lines. And the answer was just to set up I don't know, I think it was like a phone or something like
have
that,
one
and
of
just
the students
record it and then send it off to them. And that was good enough. And not just was it good enough, it was in my opinion, the perfect solution for that situation.
Not only, I mean, if you really think about it, it was probably the least intensive or didn't require a lot of effort, cost effective. So there's a lot of things that we overlook when we want to do something, because I think we only look at the end effort, but there's actually a lot that's actually involved for something to be delivered. Like for instance, we overlook what's the cost, what are you sacrificing in order to get that done? And I mean, by identifying, again, goes back to what I was saying, if you define what it is you're doing, because in that case they didn't properly define. They were just like, this is what we need, but didn't go down to the bottom of it to be like, what's my audience? Who's the audience? Like, do I need the lights or the equipment to make a perfect video? Who is it going to? Because it would have been different if it was, let's say, content that was going to be monetized, or something that was going to sell, or it would be part of his lecture content. But in this case, it was, as you said, just delivering content to someone that wasn't in class that particular day because they're sick. But because they did not understand initially, there wasn't that context, then it was like, oh, I've got this job, I need to go all out. But in turn, all they needed to do was some sort of video that needed to be given to the student.
Yeah. And I think a last point there is also that people often perceive that as, oh, you're taking the easier route, you sort of, I don't know, skimping, or you not working hard and things like that. And I think there's a big difference, obviously. And Greg touches on this quite a bit. But where it's not about not working hard at all. It's just that we often work hard at things that we don't need to work hard at.
Exactly, yeah.
Like in that case, and I mean, sure, you can justify, let's say, for example, that person did go off and make a massive production out of it. They could have justified that by saying, it wasn't necessarily worth it there, but it taught me a lot of skills.
Yeah.
And that's not to discount that would have been true, but it's just that often, let's say you have those skills, you're maybe a master video editor and a film producer and stuff like that, to go and spend hours of your life setting up and recording that lesson wasn't worth it. Right? So it's not to say that don't work hard at all. And it's not to say that when you take the easy path, you sort of slacking or something like that. It's just being smart about
I was about to say, it's about, again, I think you touched on this when you're doing your summary, about working hard on what's necessary. The whole, you discard the pointless stuff, or rather make the pointless stuff easy, but what matters, you put effort in what matters. So people will look at it as, they look at what you've put in at the end, not realizing that you were able to break down the different sections that needed to get this done. And instead of you applying the same effort throughout the project, you only put the much needed effort in what really needs that effort. Because, for instance, I know probably I'll butcher this if there are people in construction that listening to this, is they said do not skip the foundation bit, because you can do the rest quickly, but you need to make sure your foundation is solid, because then in turn, what would happen is, if you were to put the same effort in your foundation as the rest of the building, then yes, you probably would have like such a concrete structure, but probably that's not the best approach. You need that solid foundation, but going onwards, you just need to do your level best to get the building complete. You know, and I believe it's the same with when you're given a task at hand. It's the only way, and this is just what I believe, the only way you're able to take the path of least resistance is after you've taken time to understand what matters, and you put effort into that before you actually start working on what you need to work. And when you get to those points, because you were able to do that prep work, it seems as if it's easy for you to do that stuff, but you've already done the groundwork. You just pretty much finishing it off in terms of action. So I think there's a bit of misconception, if I may say, you know. And again, it's just, I think people just hate to feel as though people have it easy, you know. And I think it's also about perception. It can look easy, but doesn't necessarily mean that you did it easily, you know? Because we just see the output, but never really see the input
like
behind that.
Success people.
Exactly.
Like, oh no, but there's actually 10 years that came before that.
Before that. I mean, same with an example I can use, let's say, a play or a concert. You're there for like an hour or that 30 minutes that artist is performing or those actors are acting for a play. But in actual sense, they probably had months of rehearsals before that day. But then if the show is terrible or not, you judge them based on just that
30 minutes.
That 30 minutes you're privileged to see. But discard all the blood, sweat, and tears that came before that. You know, so I mean, if a production seems seamless and you're like, oh, I can put that together, it's mainly because people have worked this themselves off to get to that point.
That's true. Yeah. So a comment on what you said earlier about doing the important things well. So interesting to note that the book before this, I believe, was called Essentialism. And so this book is almost like a follow-up to that book about, so you have this idea of what are essential things, and he draws down on that in that book. I haven't read the book, but that's, I believe, what he's doing there. And then this is saying, how do we make those essential things effortless? So it's not necessarily that you have to make absolutely everything effortless, because it, in some sense, ironically, there's effort to make things effortless, kind of like you were alluding to. But it is about trying to make the essential things effortless, and then like we were saying in the introduction, the pointless things difficult. So James Clear also touches on that in the Atomic Habits thing about trying to create environments that make it hard to do the things that are bad and easy to do the things that are good. I think he even has like a quote that says something along the lines of, imagine what the world would be like if the good things to do were the easy things. There's definitely not a exact quote, but yeah,
we understand what you mean.
Yeah.
I think
so. But yeah, I think that's been a helpful introduction. I don't know if you have any last points that you want to add for that introduction.
No, nothing I can think of off the top of my head. Cool.
Okay, so now we're going to get to our key points, key takeaways section. This is going to probably be the meat of it. So in terms of key takeaways, there's obviously many gems in this book. We were literally saying that just before the podcast started. But we obviously can't uncover them all. And so I have some of my favorite takeaways. Peter has some of his. And I don't know if you want to start with yours, Peter, or if you want me to start.
No, go for it.
Okay. So from my side, the first one was about the ship of Vasa. So there's the story that goes, a brief summary of the story is it's about the ship and defining what done looks like or complete looks like. So I think it's an extremely powerful story. I'm going to read a condensed version of it. But definitely encourage you to read the full story in the book. Okay, so the condensed version. King Gustav II of Sweden embarked on an ambitious project to build a giant military warship, a warship that would redefine naval supremacy. That ship's name was the Vasa. But over time, the king's indecisiveness and ever-changing vision led to changes upon changes. From the changing of the ship's length to increasing the number of cannons, he even insisted on 700 ornate sculptures. The king's demands knew no bounds. There were so many changes that Heinrich Hebeson, the shipbuilder, is said to have died of a heart attack from all the stress. But still, the project continued, now under Heinrich's assistant, Hein Jacobsen. So finally, on the 10th of August, 1628, the Vasa, unfinished and untested, set sail from Stockholm, amid much fanfare, complete with fireworks, foreign diplomats, and pageantry. Then, a sudden gust of wind caused the mighty ship to tilt, and water rushed in through the open gun ports. In a mere 50 minutes, the Vasa sank, claiming the lives of 53 on board. So all this because the king had made this project almost impossible to safely complete by constantly redefining what done looks like. So in the book, there's a quote here that says, if you want to make something hard, indeed truly impossible to complete, all you have to do is to make the end goal as vague as possible. And then on the other hand, to get an important project done, it's absolutely necessary to define what done looks like. So I think you were somewhat touching on that earlier as well. And then he goes on to say, to talk about the light cost of tinkering, the heavy cost of light tinkering. So he says, whether we're writing a book proposal, putting together a presentation for clients, building a ship, or doing anything else, tinkering can improve things significantly at first. But there comes a point when the law of diminishing returns sets in, a point where our efforts begin to outpace our improvements. So he says, I define what done is as the point just before the effort invested begins to be greater than the output achieved. So yeah, I think that that story about the Vasa is a really powerful story about trying to say, make sure that you define what done is. Because if you don't, you're probably going to fail.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know if you have other thoughts about that.
Yeah, no, like you said, I touched on it before that, so often we embark on something without having clearly thought what that really looks like. I will use the example. People would say, "Oh, I would like to get married," but what does being married or family look like? Well, what are the dynamics that entail that? That's just one example. It's very important to really sit back and define those what done is or what the end goal is, because that also determines what paths you need to take or what you actually need to do. I mean, for instance, weirdly enough, one of my things for this year was read 12 books, which is one a month. And when we spoke this year, it was like, oh, let's try record a book summary a month. If you really think about it, that's 12 books. Whether or not we get to it, we hope so, because life has just become chaotic. But Dan looked like 10 titles on a piece of paper.
Yeah.
Or on a bookshelf that I can say those are books that I've read. My aim now is then to read a book a month. As hard as that may seem, but I'll try my best to read a book a month, So done is 12 books of read.
Yeah.
How do I get there? I need to actually sit down and read those 12 books. So yeah, I mean that's very easy, but it the fundamentals at the end of the day is the same. You know, I mean, just to go on as well, I think it was in the learning section. They talk about uh, the fundamentals of physics, the three principles of physics,
Yeah.
Newton's law.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, and
That section with Elon and talking about also linking ideas together and
yeah,
fundamentals.
and I mean, if you saw, hopefully I can find it, but it he was interested, I think, in documentaries, and he set out to say he would read a lot of documentaries. And at the end, with three categories, he came up with about, I think, non-existent thing, biology, and something. And in the end, they all related back to the first principle of physics, which say, or Newton's first law, which says, to every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. If you really think about it, that's just the fundamental. You know, it's goes back to the foundation that it is the building block. But if you apply, I mean, in physics, if you push something, it will roll up until whatever effort was put in is dissipated, you know? So that's the reaction from whatever action has been imposed. Or if it's a solid thing, whatever force you put in is the force that object to push back on you. And same if you apply that into biology, human beings, whatever action you do someone, most likely they'll react in a similar way. So meaning that if you act kindly to them, chances of them acting kindly back to you is pretty high. And if you mean to them, chances of them retaliating or being mean back is also very high. And if you think about it, it's still that same principle, you know? And I don't know where I was going with this, but as I said, if you define something, then you know what the fundamentals required for it are. You know, if I want people to treat me better, I need to self-introspect and treat others better. You know, so yeah, there are many ways in which all this applies. You know, it's just about what it is you choose and cling on to make what's essential effortless. You know, yeah.
Yeah, I think that like with most things, we tend to not want to clearly define that done point because we're scared, or often we think like, okay, no, but I want to achieve more or I want to do this. But if we just set that boundary of understanding, and I think something that's sort of tying together with some of your thoughts is the boundary for done in the case of things like learning and stuff like that is often we set this boundary of like, I want to know everything. But actually understanding those first principles, that's a helpful boundary to say, okay, let me first get that. And then once I've got that, then I can build on that later. But the boundary for me understanding some topic is to understand that first principle or those kind of things. And that helps us to just generally think about things. And but I think just especially defining for personal projects, I've found is defining what done looks like and not making it some unbelievable stretch goal. Just to be like, you know, I want to build this thing and I want it to do this and that's it. Not adding a million features because then you never end up finishing the project. In fact, often you don't even really get started. And I remember when I was younger, I used to think of some idea. That we had this one idea, my friend and I, where we thought about creating this almost like a search engine like Google, but it was slightly different in the way that it's more a system that you can start plugging in things. So you can kind of think of CMS, like a content management system, alongside Google. And you just have this massive repository of knowledge, but you can tie into that knowledge in all these various ways, and you can write your own. So if you wanted to do something, we would write a generic sort of module for you, I guess. And then you'd be able to use that module to tie in and do specific things for you. So if we needed to do tax calculations or something like that, we would write this module, and it's just this one-time module. And everybody needs to do tax stuff. So then you just have this thing. And then you other things, like if you wanted to process something in a standardized way, and we would come up with these standards and things. And it was an interesting goal, but the thing is, the goal just was so overly ambitious that it was actually just an idea. And we thought we were cool because we were like, oh, we have this like grand vision.
Yeah.
But the reality is, to do something like that, you actually have to say, okay, well, let's do this first little piece. And then once we're there, we done with that piece. But instead, we wanted to just build absolutely everything. Yeah.
Okay. It's yeah, I think we're so consumed to having many ideas, like you said, and you want to build everything, but I think in the end we become so overwhelmed that we don't even start.
Yeah, we can't start because we don't know where to. It's the same idea of like the young entrepreneur. The young entrepreneur, there's a lot more hope for them because they don't understand all the difficulties involved. Whereas if you have this like experienced person, it's really difficult to start a business because like, oh, flip, we're going to have to manage the employees. We're going to have to do the salary stuff. We're going to have to do this insurance thing. We're going to have to do this thing. We're going to have to do that thing. And what about this and that? And there's just thousands and thousands of things that starting a business or doing almost anything requires, that once we know them, then we get overwhelmed by them. But someone that's in a good way naive can approach that, and they're just forced to take it step by step. I'll touch on another story later, but it's an amazing thing. Defining what done looks like, how much it helps.
I think just to sidetrack there or add, just reminds me of a few years ago, I think, when we were still involved with Propeller.
Yes.
One
Wow.
There was one lady that's that mentioned that when you're working on something, so it's actually touching the done thing. Don't look at the finish line as the end point. Look beyond. So it goes back to what defining done looks like. So defining done isn't, let's say, for instance, for that ship, done wouldn't have been just, we have a structure. And I think maybe that's what they focused on, right? That's why the king came with all the changes and all that stuff. Done would have been them saying, will this thing actually sell? Because if they had clearly thought of what it takes for a ship to sell, then whenever he came with his requests, they would have a valid reason to push back on all his ambitious requests, because he would come and be like, I want this and this and that, and they would, with fact or with some sort of evidence, come back to be like, we hear you, but if you really want this to sell, we can't do that. But instead, they wanted to please him and, just add. And I mean, in today's world, we're in the same field, and that's the same trouble we face from clients.
Thinking the same, yeah.
They have these ambitious requests, and the moment we don't push back as developers to be like, we hear you, but it's overly ambitious, and try and actually create a solution for that. Then we rather digging ourselves a hole that now 2 years down the line, when the project is not done yet, they then come back and be like, oh, but you're taking too long for this. You can then go back to be like, but we tried to cater for your overly ambitious, requests. So yeah, look at what the finished product needs to be, and learn to push back. That's one way of defining when something comes in. Like, no, that's not what's in our done list. Done doesn't mean you having the product. Done means having a project launched to the market.
And we're scared of that. I used to be more scared of it than I am now, because over time, and I think reading things like this helps, is to be like, oh, actually, the end goal is to have that product launched. The end goal isn't to have this perfect piece of software, because if you have this perfect piece of software that no one uses, it's pointless. Again, you might have learned something from it, and I'm not trying to negate that, but at the end of the day, the goal of developing software isn't to develop software in some isolated bubble. It's to develop software for a client
and create value.
Exactly, to create value. And I think if you don't launch, I mean, it's been done over and over again, and again, I'll touch on it in a different story, but if you don't do that, if you don't finish it and say, I'm done now, I'm releasing this, it might not be perfect, but I'm going to release it. Because if you say, I'm going to get it to this perfect state, what's going to end up happening is, as we saw with the ship of Vasa, it's not going to end up perfect, but it's also going to be so over bloated that it's just going to sink. And so, getting that definition is critical. And a last thing on that is, when we were talking about being in the same field, and that I was thinking on university days, and that just the general idea of scope creep. So scope creep is inside of our industry, it's a big thing. I think it's slowly getting better, and it depends. Maybe it's just because I'm slowly growing and learning to push back more. But slowly people sort of understand that software is actually really complex, and adding these things is actually quite difficult. Maybe it's more difficult than it actually should be, and there should be easier ways of doing those things, but that's a separate effortless discussion. But that scope creep idea is very, very dangerous. And it's interesting to think about university, and you have these very solid deadlines. And at work as well, one of the things I really like about work and working for someone else and not working for myself is that you have these sort of quite strict deadlines of like, this is when we need this thing done. And you feel a bit of pressure, but you figure out ways of getting it done and stuff. And sometimes you miss the mark a little bit. Sometimes you go a little bit earlier. It kind of depends on the situation. But for the most part, having that sort of deadline is super useful. But then if you think about our own personal projects and just doing random things, not having that deadline is like you just end up never doing the thing. So I think if we would ever do anything like start a business or anything like that, it's vital that you get that discipline of saying, this is what done looks like.
I think maybe we have a lot to share about on what done looks like.
I think almost everything. Like we were saying, there's a lot of gems in this book.
It just also reminded me of, I think it was Jenna, right?
Yeah.
She always used to say, what are you selling? I don't know if you ever remember that.
Oh, I'm terrible with memory, but...
And remember that, the idea of the phone stand.
I do.
Remember what she came up with on what done is? Not what done is, or how she defined what the phone stand was. She somehow boiled it down to certain convenience. If you remember, like how conveniently you have your phone there, and in an upright position where you can, and so often when people are creating or trying to sell something or get into business, they don't, again, define what it is they want to sell at the end of the day. I think only after we understood, because I mean, there were so many branches that Stan was going into, but when she kind of reeled us back to be like, this is what it is, you're going to market what you're selling, etc., that's when we sort of had a short-lived period where we actually worked towards something, and unfortunately, yeah, things didn't work. But in all our months of going there on Wednesdays, that was the only time where we kind of saw some sort of output. We knew exactly how the thing was going to be made, and because we knew what we're selling and sort of or attached a value to what that thing was and what needed to be done.
Yeah.
Only after we had defined what actually the product was selling was actually there. So it goes back, power of definition.
Yeah. Absolutely true. Okay. Should we move on to the next
We
next
can
point?
move on to the next. Like,
What is your... Do you have a...
let's go with your points, then I'll climb in. Because
Okay.
it seems like mine are like all over the place. So you seem to have a system.
I'm happy.
If you've missed some stuff, then I'll bring my points afterwards.
Awesome. Okay, so then story number 2.
Okay.
So like I said, the 3 takeaways are 3 different stories. So it was that ship, that Vasa ship defining done. And then story number 2 is the plane and the courage to be rubbish.
Okay. Exactly. I would have stepped on your toes because that was so go for it.
Okay, cool. So it's a slightly longer story, but it's worth it. So in 1959, the Kramer Prize for building a human-powered aircraft was established, and many had tried but failed. So now we enter Paul McCready, saddled with huge debt at the time. He didn't have time to save it. He didn't have a team, and he didn't have all of this sort of wealth and money. The only thing he had was friends and family, including his young son, whom he enlisted as a test pilot. Meanwhile, his competitors were all staffed and well-funded, and they built big, complex, elegant airplanes with large wingspans and many wooden ribs and metal and heavy plastic casings. So these teams, even though they had all this stuff, they didn't come close to achieving the prize. So at first, McCready couldn't figure out why. Then it hit him. Everyone had been working to solve the wrong problem. The real challenge wasn't to build an elegant aircraft that could do a figure 8 on the field around 2 platoons, or pylons. It was to build a large, light aircraft, no matter how ugly it is, that you could crash, then repair, then modify, alter, and redesign. And the key is that you could do that fast. That was when he suddenly realized that there was an easy way to do it. So McCready and his son immediately got to work on a model, inspired by one of the simplest, most aerodynamic mechanisms in nature, bird flight. Within 2 months, they were flying the first version of the Gossamer Condor. It weighed just 55 pounds, which is 25 kilos, and it looked amateurish, especially compared to the sleeker models that others had created. But that was exactly the point. McCready said if it had crashed on the landing, you'd get a broomstick and you'd get some duct tape, then you'd duct tape the broomstick handle back on, and you'd be flying in 5 minutes. That accident would have kept those other larger, more sophisticated teams from flying for something like 6 months. So a huge amount of flight experience was gotten out of this rapid, fast crash and then redo and crash and then redo and trying to figure that out. And over the course of just a few months, the Gossamer Condor made some 222 flights, sometimes several in a single day. Some of his competitors' machines didn't achieve that in their entire lifetimes. It was on its 223rd flight that the Condor completed the figure 8 challenge and won the first Kramer Prize. 2 years later, Macready would win the second Kramer Prize when the Gossamer Albatross successfully crossed the English Channel. His most brilliant insight wasn't some advanced breakthrough in the science of flight. It was simply that focusing on the elegance and sophistication of the aircraft was actually an impediment to progress. And then the last thing that he says there is, similarly to your own pursuit of what matters, if you want to build a better aeroplane, don't try and get everything exactly right the first time. Instead, embrace the rubbish, no matter how ugly it is, so that you can crash, repair, modify, and redesign fast. It's a far easier path for learning, growing, and making progress on what's essential. So yeah, another great story that captures that spirit of fail fast and learn. Very similar in the software industry, where we have this idea, or especially in the new startup software world, it's fail fast. And so you basically launch the product as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Once you've got like even almost before an MVP, you launch the product and then you see how the market reacts to it and you learn and adapt from that. Yeah, I could go on for a while, but I don't know if you want to jump.
To add with that, I think he speaks about the whole, if you let's say doing a course or something, you want to take a test, identify what you already know, and then focus on the questions you failed, because that's what you don't know. And it goes back to what you just said, fail fast. But just to tie, and I mean, it's interesting how, this chapter was titled Progress. And it reminded me of, I think in Atomic Habits, it talks about procrastination. And the one concept of procrastination that still like, yeah, when I think of it, I'm like, wow, that's just interesting, is that the reason people procrastinate is because they don't want to fail. And that really comes in the way of progress. Like you say, for progress, you need to fail fast.
You have to, yeah.
But if you procrastinate, I think we sugarcoat what procrastination is, but the true essence of it is people don't want to fail. As a result, they're like, if I don't get the thing done, then I won't fail. But that's what's needed for progress. And yeah, I mean, with that, like you said, that section after that story talks about, start with rubbish, and I mean, it talks about former Pixar CEO that says we all start out ugly. Everyone of Pixar stories start out that way. The earliest sketches are, according to Katma, awkward and unformed, vulnerable, and incomplete. Like, I think we generally just have a fear of how something looks.
Yeah.
And I mean, that takes many forms, like people's appearance and like all that, the work presented, but what will make it what it needs to be if no one sees to offer that criticism, to tell you that fix this.
Yeah, if you don't get that feedback.
If you don't get that feedback, because you spend so long trying to create this amazing thing that by the time you get feedback, which is like 2 days before launch, you get this feedback back that then you don't have time to correct it. And I mean, just that line, we all start out ugly. Yes, it seems harsh, but when I read that line, I actually thought of, even as human beings, or I was like even reflecting on myself, who I am now, today, and who I was 10, 15 years ago was like totally different, you know? And it's based on that whole thing of these were my thoughts, these were my beliefs. I expressed them, and people were like, but no, that's not how you do things, you know? And through that, you know, I believe has shaped who I am today.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, there's things that I think back to, like, 15 years ago, you didn't catch me dead saying that or doing that, you know? But now it's like, no, I've actually progressed. You know, I've gone through that process of being in an ugly place, you know, being told that's not the way to do things, to where I am now. Not that I'm the perfect human being, but I'm far better than I was 15 years ago. And it takes that pushback, or if you want to say failing, and then, you know, recalibrating, getting back, you know, and yeah, progressing. Um, so yeah, yeah, start with rubbish, you know, and goes on. It says, make failure as cheap as possible. That's
Yeah.
also very, very vital. I mean, yeah, I mean, I think that's where it tells the story of his son, you know, where he once they were saving, or they were trying to teach him how to save, and he bought something that he didn't
Oh,
like, and
yes.
then now he's like saving up for some trip, and he's almost certain he'll do that, you know. He won't get distracted along the way to get. And I mean, yeah, that's, yeah, I think that was for me one down point when I read that, you know. I felt like I don't think I've made that many cheap mistakes in life. So as a result, I'm having those expensive mistakes, you know. I wish I had stepped out earlier in life, like in terms of just getting out of the box, exploring, because, yeah, I think, but yet again, I think maybe this is the right time for me to do that.
Yeah. Never too late.
It seems a lot more than it would have when I was little, but it might be cheaper than if
Yeah.
I had experienced the season I am in my life, let's say 10 years down the line. So, yeah, I think that's very important that we make, you know, cheap mistakes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah, I think that's for almost anything, right? Like, I mean, in our field, especially software development, making cheap mistakes is critical. And it's also the idea of, I can't remember exactly how it ties together, but there's the idea of preventative things. So there's preventative medicine and stuff. But I feel like it was a Y Combinator investor that I was listening to who spoke about trying to do things on the left hand side of so there's a shift left approach, and so instead of doing things on the far right, so obviously this is for generally English speaking people, we read from left to right, and we do things from left to right, and the idea of shift left, which means try and learn those things. So try and incorporate, whether it's security practices or whether it's just doing general things in software development, doing them earlier on in the development cycle, because doing it later on, it costs a lot more. So take, for example, there's a security vulnerability. Now, if you find that out before you launch the product, then what can happen is you say, oh, okay, well, we just fixed that thing because you have all the context and you've failed fast. You've failed. I mean, in this case, it's failing extremely fast because, so for the non-technical people, we have what's called build systems often, and they automatically it's called continuous integration, continuous delivery. And these systems, before you release code, they automatically build the code and they test the code and make sure that it works fine for certain cases. And what people are doing is they're incorporating security practices and that into that build step. So it's before it even gets to the release. So it's, like I say, learning extremely quickly. So you try and make that release, you fail, and you realize that there's a security vulnerability. Then you immediately have the context because you basically finished working on it like maybe an hour before that. And then you update the thing to incorporate the new security practice or something like that. And then you release it. And that idea of shifting earlier on preventative stuff is also really helpful. But the only way you can do that is by trying to learn things as quickly as possible. Because if you are sort of waiting for the results to kind of happen years down the line, then you can't get that rapid cycle because you have to wait for, say, 5-10 years, whether it's medicine, software, anything. But yeah, I think it's really helpful to look at how we can fail fast and not be afraid of it. Yeah, because a lot of people are so afraid. So that critical feedback and all of that, if you're taking offense to that, if you can learn to not take offense to critical feedback and be able to sort it into, okay, this person is trying to offend me and it's not the end of the world, they're just being a bit mean, and oh, that's actually a useful piece of information that I can learn from, also helps a lot. But we have to get used to failing.
No, true. I mean, fear of failure is a real thing. So
Yeah.
So what's the next final? Unless there's more than 3.
No, there's 3, but you can add if you want. Okay, so the third story is reaching the South Pole, and it's the idea of slow and steady wins the race. So he even speaks about Aesop's fables, and the hare and stuff like that. So it's a similar story to that. And just as a quick preface to it is that idea of the tortoise and the hare. I had heard that story, and you can kind of recite the story very loosely and stuff. And it goes back to his point about the teaching and the stories and things like that. That teaching things, and especially teaching them in a story form, is extremely powerful because everyone can teach that story of the hare and the tortoise and sort of, I guess, slowly get the idea of it. So it's just a helpful point of back to the idea of stories.
I mean, yes, there's a whole story or saying of one person goes quickly, and then as a group you go far. I don't know if it's a similar thing, that as a group you stick together, you probably take the pace of the slowest person, and but together with encouragement that you go a long way. Yet if you're alone, you can go really fast, but once you burn out, you'd like no one to motivate you and all that kind of stuff.
And you're done. It's true. Okay, so reaching the South Pole. So again, gonna go for the condensed version, which isn't super condensed, but slightly more condensed. So
the previous one seemed longer than the actual.
Okay, so in the early 20th century, as the great exploration reached its peak, the great age of exploration reached its peak, one of the most sought after goals was to reach the South Pole. 2 rival teams, a courageous British group and a determined Norwegian squad, set off on an epic quest to the South Pole. The British team adopted the strategy of pushing themselves to the limit on favorable days and hunkering down on the more challenging ones. In contrast, the Norwegian team chose the steadfast approach of covering 15 miles a day. Come rain or shine, they would stick to the consistent pace of 15 miles a day. The journey to the South Pole was hundreds of miles, but fascinatingly, As the Norwegian team closed in on the pole, that's the team sticking to the 15 miles a day no matter what, they were just 45 miles away from the finish line, so close, with perfect weather, that one would have expected them to push forward in one last heroic effort to the pole. Yet, they defied logic and they stuck to their 15-mile-a-day rule, taking 3 days to cover that final stretch. Astonishingly, though, they still reached the South Pole a full 34 days ahead of their British rivals. But the story doesn't end there. The Norwegians, thanks to their unwavering pace, had enough energy and resilience to make the arduous journey back to their homelands, while the British team, tragically, demoralized by their defeat and out of energy, froze to death on their return. A biographer remarked that the Norwegian team achieved their monumental goal without particular effort, a testament to the power of an effortless pace, serving as a powerful reminder of the importance of steady progress and the wisdom in not doing more today than one can recover from by tomorrow. So yeah, another very helpful story. And I think it's very similar to that Hare and the Tortoise. But it's the thing that makes it extremely powerful for me is that it's a real story of just showing, even under these extreme conditions, and even in a real race that was, I guess, for a lot of people at that time, especially those explorer type people, it was probably like the pinnacle of their life. Like, I'm going to get to the South Pole. I want to be the first person. And I'm sure, I mean, this is what early 20th century. I'm sure that many, many people had tried before and not gotten there. But then just through keeping that consistent pace, not too fast, not too slow, helped them.
I think, so it seems like I also have like very practical stories in my life regarding some of these chapters, but sorry. In terms of the pace one, I remember, so I was actually thinking about this morning. Like years ago when I was doing my GCSEs, I used to study in like 20-minute gaps. So I'd study for 20 minutes, 5 minute break, and like very consistent and very disciplined with that. And in this chapter, it talks about the upper side of the upper bound, and it's that, and which was what the sailors did. They had a specific distance. They said, regardless of what happens, we're going to cover this, and I believe I subconsciously like adopted that. I was like very disciplined and like clock in front of me, 20 minutes, like regardless of where I am, I would like stop and be like, time for a break, back. And I think it's really important and in different aspects of life that we do that, because it's so easy to tell yourself, no, I can do with one more hour, and I know it's bad correlation, but it goes back to the compounding. That 1 hour in a week is 5 hours.
Exactly.
5 extra hours. And I mean, that's 10 in 2 weeks, 15 in 3, 20 in a month, 20 extra hours to your normal, 40 40-hour week. That means you're doing 45. And I mean, and if you're not being compensated for it, the other things that come with it. But in turn is within a month, you probably burn out because you've put in extra hours than you should have. If you look at it on a daily basis, it looks like nothing, but it accumulates over time. And that goes back that in 10 means that you're not pacing yourself.
Yeah.
Because come then 4 weeks down the line, you're more tired than someone that's doing the normal 8 to 5,
Yeah.
and you wonder why. And you just haven't accounted for that extra hour you've been spending working. So it's very important to be disciplined in that regard. I mean, I think I suffered from the losing teams, um, demise 2 years ago.
I've
When
suffered from it countless times.
where I mean that's the one I can remember, so clearly is when lockdown hit. There was no clear markings of where work starts, where work ends, and where life starts and where life ends. Just because I was in the same space, working, living, and everything. And when 5 p.m. comes and there was something I was working on, I'd be like,
Let me just finish it.
there's no commute home. Like I'm already home. Next thing, I'm sitting there in the dark, and I'm like, that's an hour 30 minutes, and you do that continuously for like a month or so. You end up wondering why am I so tired, but you haven't accounted for those extra hours you've been working. And I mean, ever since then, I've told myself that work is work, home life is home life. That's why whenever people ask me, but why do you go to the office every day? It helps me
that separation.
create that separation. Not that I would... days when I work at home, I enjoy working at home. But I just like the discipline that gives me that the moment I leave the office to go home, I know that I'm done with work. It gives me that proper separation, and that is me creating a pace for myself to say I work 8 hours a day. I go 8 hours and that's it, So it's very important to pace yourself,
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of ways of doing that, and it works in different ways for different people. And so for the office hours thing, for some people, they put on formal clothes if they're working from home, and that's their sort of divider. But it's important to have that divider, whether it's a room or a space. It's to tie these things to, okay, I'm going to start this process now, or I'm finishing this process. So Cal Newport, I can't remember what he calls it, but it's something like a shutdown ritual, where at the end of the workday, I don't know if it's in his book Deep Work or where it is, but it's a topic that he generally talks about, where at the end of his workday, he has a ritual where he will verbally say something. I can't remember if it's like...
I should say Greg also has a similar ritual. He does mention it of how
maybe even talks...
He talks how for him he calls out the time loudly.
Yes, yeah. and it seems like a ridiculous thing to do, but it helps. If something like that helps you definitively say, okay, cool, I'm done with this now. And then you move on to the next thing, whether it's just family time or making dinner or going for a run or doing something like that. Even going and chilling on the TV. You don't have to be doing some uber productive thing. Having that clear separation helps a lot. There's touching back on what you said earlier as well. So for steady, consistent progress, we need to find that right range, and we need to have the upper and the lower bound. So it's not you were speaking about the upper bound, which is helpful to say this is when the cutoff is, but the lower bound is also helpful. So there's a quote in the book that says, finding the right range keeps us moving at a steady pace so we can make consistent progress. With the lower bound, that should be high enough to keep us feeling motivated, but low enough that we can still achieve it even on the days when we're dealing with unexpected chaos. And then the upper bound should be high enough to constitute good progress, but not so high as to leave us feeling exhausted. as we get into this rhythm, the progress begins to flow and we're able to make effortless action or take effortless action. So I think having that lower bound, because the way that I think about it is like almost a car. So I don't know if this analogy will hold up well, but almost with a car, when you start the car, if you're going too slowly, the car is literally going to stall, right? But if you're going too fast, like there's a certain point where you actually, you can't go much faster without just revving the engine to its max. And that's not going to make the engine very happy, especially over the long term. And so I think finding that sort of middle ground is always very helpful. And I can't remember if it's in this book, but there's the idea of the writer.
Yeah.
And the writer finding, so often writers and the more artsy type people talk about finding inspiration. And then there's a saying that goes, I need inspiration to write, and inspiration strikes at 7 o'clock every morning. And the joke behind that is that the writer, and this goes for pretty much anything, the writer in this case is trying to say, well, at 7 o'clock or whatever time it is, that's when I'm going to sit down and I'm going to start writing. And I will write for 2-3 hours. And that's my block of time. And if you just sit there patiently and do your thing, then inspiration will strike over time, and you'll figure out how to write and do things. But if you just sort of chaotically like, okay, I'm feeling good today, then you write a ton. What ends up happening is you go and write a ton, and then you don't feel like it the next day because it's I worked so hard yesterday and I'm tired and this and that. But if you just consistently do, again, almost anything, investing, writing, reading, studying, stuff builds up over time. So having that steady pace is, super vital.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's that discipline we need, At the end of the day, we need that discipline to say, this is, again, as you said, the low and upper, but this is the least I will do, to be happy, and this is the most. And like when you get to that cutoff, put your foot down, be firm with yourself. I think that's one thing we try and be like, just for today. And again, we do not stop to think what's the effect of that in the long run.
And it's not just the discipline. So often people talk about the discipline of starting, and starting is really most of the time the hard part. But if you get to starting, maybe you're someone who continuously starts things and does things, but then they sort of burn out often. It's not just the discipline of starting, vital though that is. It's also the discipline of finishing. Saying, this is when my cutoff point is, like you were saying. So I think it's those two bounds that you need to try and get into place, that lower and that upper bound, and saying, this is when I'm going to do the stuff that I need to do. And beyond that, that's fine.
That's fine.
Tomorrow's problem or however long's problem, but you set those boundaries. There's a military mantra that they also mention, which I really like because it's a super condensed version of it. Doesn't quite capture the lower and the upper bound, but I still think it's really useful. And the military mantra is, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And it just, every time I think about it, I'm like, there's something there that is, if people were to realize it and really sort of internalize it, it's the same with the Aesop's fable of the tortoise and the hare, going back to that, where if people really internalize that story and you say, if I really do just take slow and steady progress, if I don't try and become the smartest person overnight, or if I don't try and become the richest person overnight, and I mean, I wouldn't even try and become the smartest or the richest person, because I think that that's not really what life is about. But it's helpful to and it's interesting to try and achieve those things. But if you try and achieve them overnight, it's not going to happen. But if you just take slow and steady steps towards it at that consistent pace, you find the pace that works for you, then you will achieve remarkable things. Like you look back and you'll be like, oh wow, that's quite something. And it's not because you're an incredible person or anything like that. It's just because taking those slow and steady steps really, it is how anything in life makes progress.
Cool. In conclusion, I don't know if there's anything else you...
I have a little bit of a concluding thought, but I don't know if you want to try and wrap up.
Yeah, wrap up.
Okay, so my concluding thought was, I was thinking about a while ago, I had this change in perspective. So I was originally thinking, it'd be so great to get out of this work-life cycle where I'm just like, everything I do is work, and you just got to keep on grinding through the workday. And throughout most of my university career, I think I was trying to be successful, not because I just enjoyed the process of it, but because I actually just wanted to get to this point of being like super rich and retired and like just do whatever I want and everything like that. And at some point, and I'm very thankful for this, I had this perspective shift of life isn't actually really about trying to escape work. Work is just, it's a wonderful part of life actually. But we often try so hard to do things and we feel like we need to put in all this effort in order to achieve things. And effort is required, but it's that idea of consistent effort. And if we look back at that, trying to pace ourselves well, what we actually find is we can end up in that flow state. Going back to the example of the writer, inspiration strikes at 7 o'clock. And if you can get into that sort of rhythm of doing things and pacing yourself well, if it's running a sprint or writing something or creating some program or whatever it might be, doing some painting, some work of art, if you can just get into that steady, slow rhythm of progress, you can actually learn to enjoy work and like really enjoy it. Because if you think about what are the meaningful things in life, we think, it would be so great to just go back to that retired thing. It'd be so great to retire and just chill. But actually, doing things is very meaningful. And it brings a lot of meaning to us as human beings. And if you're on a very long holiday break, you'll realize that over time it's like, okay, let me just give me something to do. And that's because doing things is meaningful. And doing things for yourself is meaningful. But doing things for others is possibly most meaningful. And so if you can try and, in your work life and in just life in general, look at how you can do things and doing them for others, not doing them to try and get to this new position or this or that, but just enjoy doing it and take slow and steady steps, and don't worry about the client breathing down your throat. It's easier said than done, granted. Don't worry about the client breathing down your throat. Say, okay, well, this is what I can do. I know my lower bound and I know my upper bound. I'm not going to go below that lower bound because I know then I'll stall and I'll just get super lazy, and that's not a nice place to be either. But I'm also not going to go so fast that I end up choking. And as he says a while back in the book, I'm not going to do more today than I can recover from by tomorrow. I'm not going to do more this week than I can recover from in the week. Because if you do that, you just burn out. And so I think that perspective shift was very helpful in me being able to say, I can actually enjoy what I'm doing and do things like this, recording the podcast and doing things like that, that at a past point in my life, I would have considered, okay, I need to do this thing in order to be successful and in order to be someone who's doing good stuff and all of this and become wealthy or And now I'm like, it's fine. I'm just going to do the things that I enjoy doing. I'm going to do them at a consistent pace.
Yeah.
And it's actually a wonderful thing. So, yeah. In fact, not just work is the straining thing, but it's actually something that is meaningful.
Yeah.
And it can be effortless if we take the right approaches.
I think just to add on that, I remember, I think it was 2 years ago, I was having a conversation with my previous boss about what it is that drives us to do what we do. I think, again, this thing of not defining stuff, but in our conversation, we spoke about how, there's just something about making a difference and knowing that you've made a difference. And in this context, it was like through code, like you make a piece of software more efficient somewhere and you saving someone 2 minutes, and saving someone 2 minutes today seems small, but in a year, I'm sure we work for less than 365 days, but that times 2, that's 700 minutes in a year that you're saving someone from. In the book, it talks about the whole drawer situation where the guy opens his drawer,
Yes, that's a good one.
picks out something, but struggles to close it every single time, instead of taking the time to just fix it so that it doesn't happen again. He was happy to struggle for 2 minutes.
Well, yeah, it was like struggling for 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Versus that like 2 minutes to just fix the issue.
Just fix the issue, He was happy to struggle, But like I said, that time compounds, it's 30 seconds today, but, in a week's time, that's what, 2.5 minutes you've lost, and that's more than the time it would have taken him to fix whatever issue it is. So, it's just about, at the end of the day, critically thinking about what it is that you can change to make your life much easier. That's what we all want. We want things to be effortless. And yes, it takes an initial work to be put in, but the residual results, I think, are priceless at the end of the day. We really need to get in the habit of sitting down, defining, and knowing what the outcome is, and setting the processes in place to help you. There's a whole section of automate. If you know that there's something that you do every single day, think of ways of automating that. I think Atomic Habits talks about, and he touches about briefly on how if there's certain money you want saved every single month, create an automatic debit order that sends, that amount to your savings account. It's the Monday. It's so funny. Reading that, I was like, it's so interesting how all our debit orders are on stuff that make us use this lightly, but regress financially, because it'll be paying that bill, paying that. Some bills are like medical aid, but it's so against towards that. But no one actually sits up to say, I want to save 1,000 rand every single month and have an automatic debit order or transfer to say every single month I'll be disciplined to have 1,000 sent to my savings account. But yet with the other things, we've made them so important that they need to be debit orders. But
happy to have that Netflix subscription,
but you can save that same 300. Oh, what? How much is Netflix?
Yeah, it's like 200
bucks.
Like
but if you really think about it, that's $200 for what, 12 months. It's like 2,400.
Not nothing.
That's not nothing, that's money you could do a lot with later down the line. So we need to get in the habit of adjusting our lives, accordingly, so that things seem seamless and effortless around us. And also change your perspective. At the end of the book, he talks about that, instead of wallowing, being stressed about the total situation, they decided to change their perspective that they will enjoy life. They will sing. And that's something I'm trying to apply to my life, that I work too hard not to have fun. If I can, I'll do it. If it's within my bounds, which is financially, time-wise, I'll do it. I think it's very important, to, again, clearly define your purpose or identify what your purpose is. Like you were sharing now, like to you, it was more of what can I do to be wealthy? Everything has to be, an end goal to something, has to make you
Poor
rich.
young James.
But now it's like you've changed that, like, what makes me happy? What do I enjoy doing? And it's important. Even the work I enjoy the work I do. The people can sometimes, make it difficult, but I'm happy to work up and develop software. I enjoy that. It's just now trying to navigate how do I manage all the noise that comes with that. How do I push back when things are a bit unrealistic? Just learning those different things to get along to, again, make life effortless. I think it's very important and can take you a long way. So those are just my concluding thoughts.
Yeah. So, I think just to sort of wrap up, it's taking those things, like defining what done is, to not be afraid of failing and to just continuously try and iterate on the things that you're doing. And then to take things at that right pace. If you can do that, then you can end up in that effortless state, effortless action, effortless results. Yeah. Great book. Definitely think people should read it. I am pretty sure that I'll read it again if I can find the time. Yeah.
Cool. Definitely would recommend.
Awesome. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, James. Until next time.
Until next time.